Let's talk a little bit, friends. Thank you again for just getting our heads moving today. I want to start, I think, with Shomava, if you don't mind. You were sharing a bit of your thoughts in the chat. Thanks for that. And Rachel, I'll let you get a little caught up with that chat. Shomava, I'm wondering, I think a lot of folks, or some folks, have been asking some of the questions that you posed about equity for a while now. And some people are seeing for the first time or experiencing for the first time inequities that are being really highlighted by COVID-19. And in your we of we's, in your work, I'm curious to know, how do you see, what will it take, and how do you see the process of bringing all of these folks together that have had this view of equity, and then people who are starting to understand it better, to develop this sort of collective understanding that we can move forward with this fear that some folks have, that we're just going to go back, that there won't be a new normal, that we're just going to go back to the way things were and some of the inequities that exist. Do you talk a little bit from your experience of what do you think about bringing the folks together?
I think, Lisa, this is the most important thing that we can do in this moment, is to take this new awareness that people have, so many more people have had, about the differences in what ought to be a common thing, and yet how it actually shows up in the world for people who have experienced those inequities forever. It's not new to them. They've lived through HIV, H1N1. Every pandemic actually challenges it. But the real question is, there's a critical mass shift in our consciousness collectively that I think this moment is bringing, where if we can harness some of that awareness into some collective ways of engaging in dialogue and then engaging in policy and systems change, we can begin to get there. So some ways we're doing that, led by Wellbeing Trust and a number of us who are partners in the Wellbeing in the Nation Network. There are a series of conversations that engage communities all across the country around what are into developing a blueprint for community mitigation and resilience for the CDC and FEMA. And one of the things that I think is so critical to do as part of that process is to engage as diverse a set of voices as possible. And as part of that, we've been building literally networks across networks, just connecting the dots and inviting people in to really bring in to bring their voices and ideas in as much as possible. But the second thing is that I think is even more powerful, is to actually build that into something that it becomes an ongoing opportunity to learn and create change together. That's not led by one organization. Right now, we happen to be supporting and stewarding, but that really allows us to collectively say, what are these underlying legacies that are getting there? What are some things that we can change about the way the economy currently works that leads some people into harm, and what it means to mitigate against the impacts of coronavirus on populations that are experiencing inequities. And as we try those out and learn what actually works and what doesn't, as people with lived experience of inequities actually get to weigh in, and we measure things based on what they think actually made things better rather than our own ideas about that, along with any other measures we might have. Like, as we begin to engage in a process of shared learning together, we have a chance of reweaving the social fabric that has right now, we've talked about it recently in terms of political terms, but it's really reweaving our social fabric between the haves and have-nots that have been part of our legacy that we've accepted forever. And I think that's really part of what I think networks can give and bring into this moment in time that we're leading into.
Thank you. Rachel, I want to toss a question at you. You won't be surprised by this one. You had alluded to in your comments a little bit that some, people have privacy questions or equity questions when we start talking about what feels like very expensive technology right now. And today we're thinking far future. So when you think about your role in this work, what are some of the things that you think about to keep those in check? How do we keep sort of ethics and privacy matters and equity in check as we're growing this new technology world?
Yeah, that's a very good question. I think Well, one of the things that we often say, at least if we're building technologies, and one of the things I just want to clarify, Cable Labs, we build technology. We don't actually commercialize any technology, meaning we don't build products or services. So we're building this technology. Some of it's open source. Some of it is within the network. And that being said, we don't actually commercialize any of those. So it's really challenging to try to showcase like our vision of the future when we're not profiting off of all of those different technologies that are out there. So I think one of the things that we often say is that you have to have the people in the room to make sure that you're keeping yourself in check. Actually, this video is about 3 years old now. It's going on 2 to 3 years. And I think it's really important to make sure that you have a team that's made up of diverse individuals from all varying backgrounds. We actually got to provide input around the next few videos. This came out prior to my joining Cable Labs. And I think that that's really important, even just a video where you're showcasing this type of technology. You need to make sure that you're opening up who all should even be a part of that video and how are we going to make this accessible. I think rural access is certainly rural broadband access. There's a huge digital divide today. I don't think there's a question about that. So how can somebody experience that type of technology in the future? I'm still catching up on a lot of the chat. There's a ton of really good points in the chat. And I do agree. I think don't suppress cognitive dissonance and all of the pieces that are there. I think the other piece of this too around privacy, and this is going to sound, again, I'm not a policy wonk, but I think it's really important to get involved at a local level that ultimately will extend to a national level. It's really important to be a part of community engagement, community involvement, and to be able to contribute in that way locally, because it does make an impact. And I think we all have to check our own biases as well too, and that's something that is really important as well. And I would say Cable Labs and the rest of our industry can also continue to do a better job of that too.
Great, thanks. Charles, I want you to wrap us up just in a minute, if you could, and share your thought on, the investment in these networks from your space. What would you tell your colleagues? You've been a long time champion of investing in networks in the foundation and philanthropy world. What would you tell your colleagues in this new world of investing in networks?
Yeah, well, I think network investments are both, effective and also cost effective. If you think about trying to get one institution to change its practices, usually requires hiring an expensive consultant, $50,000, $70,000, $100,000 that no one has. But that through the medium of a network, you could have, one consultant or a team of consultants help, 30. So there's a way, I think, of being fairly effective with the limited resources that foundations have. And I think sometimes folks outside the foundation think about foundations as having unlimited resources, but in many cases, we're like film producers. I can make maybe 15 to 20 movies a year. I can make 15 to 20 grants max. And everyone is expecting that each of those is going to be a blockbuster. And the way you do that is by trying to, combine resources, and also that peers learn best from peers. I'm not going to convince a purchasing director of a university that they should buy from small local minority-owned businesses. I could tell them why they should, but they will listen to a peer who has that role, who has done it, and who can tell them how. And that is, I think, the power of these networks. But I do think there are some challenges as well, because, the data that gets thrown off by networks, the way is not just viewable and understandable by people within the network, but it's by those who manage the network platform. And that is where I think some of the most troubling issues exist about whether or not information is personal or private, or is, opaque or visible to everyone. And that there are all these ways in which the infrastructure we've created sort of privileges those that manage the networks rather than provide the infrastructure, backbone for the network, rather than the actual members themselves. And can be used for all kinds of questionable and dodgy purposes. And I think Soma raises, a critical question about the construction of we-ness. And I wonder about whether or not a sense of we or us as a collective enterprise requires or they or them to define in against. And there's this whole a sort of issue with, not just within anthropology, but in thinking about society and the way in which human beings have displayed a really troubling propensity to find, in some cases, some of the most meaningless differences and elevate those into profound gulfs and divides. And I think you take a look, the invention of printing and mass literacy helped people imagine themselves as belonging to a set of nations, something outside their immediate community. And I think we're at this moment here where digital technology provides this other, very potentially positive moment for us to expand the ambit of people with whom we feel some degree of connection and kinship. But it also can lead to intensified conflict between those who don't necessarily share our perspectives or identities or our values.
Thank you for that. And just beautiful way of weaving back through some of the other things that we had talked about, belonging and yeah, so thanks. I'm inspired, wonderful panel, I think. I hope the other 192 people that have been listening to this are equally inspired for the rest of our day. Thank you so much to the three of you. We're going to move into networking mode now, so you'll be back at your table